everybody to the Utah Women of Web3 Lunch and Learn. This is a monthly event that we do. It's part of our start power this month is the turnout. It's obvious that we're excited to see Kathy. I want to kind of just say why we think it's important that women get involved in Web3. I am a aficionado of blockchain and Web3 technologies, and I truly believe they will change the world. And if women don't have a front row seat in that, we will be left behind, and a lot of times getting involved in something is just for it to, for a minute, not be as frightening or feel as unwelcoming. And so the goal here is just to create a safe space, and we do want men allies. I don't want to create a future where women get to do something that men can't. I just want to make sure women can feel like they have a seat at the table. So to this week, we would like to present, we have the fantastic Kathleen Roberts, or Kathy Roberts, as those of us who deal with her every day like to say. I'm going to give her a minute to introduce herself, and then and tell us a little bit about your background. She has an unbelievable background, and I have to say I've worked with Kathy for the last year. She is a force in this ecosystem and is really helping craft what we're building here for the future. And her background's unique, and we'd love to learn more about you, Kathy.
Thanks, Cameo. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate all of you. I feel like I have my own cheering section today. If you want to heckle me, though, I have arranged for someone to take you out of the building. But I agree exactly with what you're saying about women in Web3 and the opportunities. And I've had some wonderful opportunities. People ask me about my background, and I tend to shy away from it because I'm like, I don't think anybody even remembers some of the companies I've worked for. Or I was telling a couple of people earlier, I think I started before the child labor laws were enacted. So in the 5th grade, I did get a job at Sears, and it was a Christmas job, 1971. And I was absolutely so delighted when they called me for this part-time job after school that they said, would you like to come to work for Christmas? It was November 19th. And they said, we'll pay you $2.10 an hour. And I thought, whoa, I'm going to be rich. I'm going to be really rich. And so Christmas came and went. And I thought, okay, they're going to call me and lay me off, right? Because that's what happens after Christmas. And then other people were being laid off, and they had been there maybe 4 or 5 years. And I thought, sooner or later, they're going to call and tell me, don't come anymore. But every time they put a schedule on my time card, I showed up for work. And then when they did call me, they said, how would you like to stay? And I thought, great. So I'm in high school, go to college. I try to come up with what I want to do for a career. A year after I started, they'd put me in HR, and I was the HR girl. Then I would write down all the comments about should we hire you or not, like, were you happy? Did you have rosy cheeks? The HR was very different back then. It was like, nice outfit. But then I spent about 15 years at Sears in HR. And then through their tumultuous times, I was the closer. I lived in Washington State, and the first closure was in Portland, Oregon. And the important big guys would walk in and say, we're going to close this place. They would walk out, and people like me would walk in, and I got this reputation of being the guy who's going to close the place. Even if I just went shopping someplace, people were like, why are you here? And that was from Washington to San Diego, Washington, Oregon, California, and Arizona is the area that I covered for it. And that's a very hard job. People at that time, companies were very compassionate, and you really stayed and did a lot of work with everyone to get them retired or get them other jobs, et cetera. So, but after 15 years in HR, I thought I need to do something else. And I said, I really want to be a store manager someday. Another place that mostly men were in. And I didn't exactly fit the Sears profile, tall, thin, a beige trench coat, but I was going, I know how to be a fair-haired boy. I can do that, and I'm going to figure it out. And so I would do things like I'd walk faster because I was always with a bunch of men. I'd wear higher heels so I could be taller, big hair, whatever it took. I kept a $100 bill in my pocket so that I could pay for lunch. This is before there were MasterCard and Visa and all those things. But as time went on, this opportunity came up because Sears was a big conglomerate. They had bought Coldwell Banker, they had bought Dean Witter, they already had created Allstate, and they had plenty of money. In here, right here in Salt Lake, is the CEO, former CEO of Morgan Stanley. Grew up here, went to Judge Memorial, ended up McKinsey, and was the advisor at Sears. And he came up with this idea of what is it that you already do well that we could do again? And I always call this the burn the match twice kind of scenario. And they did credit so well. Credit was making more money than retail. Retail might make money by December, but credit was making money all the time. And that's how they came up with the idea of doing a Visa, a MasterCard. Of course, when they went to those associations, Sears was the Walmart of their day, and the association said, no, we don't want you guys. You'll become a bank, and you'll take over everybody else. I asked, how's that thing going? And they said, great, we're going to have this Visa, MasterCard, or whatever. But when they said no, Sears bought a bank, and Discover Card was born, and I was asked to go and help with the startup. So when you talk about what I'm doing now, this is not my first startup, but it is going to be something that I think in the future will even eclipse what I've done in the past. As going over to Discover, I helped out, and I say I was the cleanup woman because they did have a mess again in HR, and I had gotten out, and I went back, and then a few months after I got there, I thought, I wonder why they sent for me from Seattle instead of hiring somebody in Chicago down the road. Then I found out they had gone through 3 HR directors in 9 months. And I thought, oh, that's it. So it took a little bit of a while to clean all that up, make it work well. But from HR, again, the first time I ran the payroll, I have to be honest, when I ran the payroll and I saw the executive payroll, I'm like, I think I want to be the president of this company. When I saw that some of those guys paid off their Social Security taxes by April, I'm like, I think those are the jobs for me. And I'm a mercenary. I'll be honest. I'm a true mercenary. And people would laugh, and people would say, because they always were concerned, what is it that you'd like to do in this company? And I'd say, I'd like to be the president. And people would laugh for about 2 years, and then the laughter ceased. I did say, I've shaded the truth occasionally, and they said, could you go to Columbus, Ohio? It had only been in Chicago 2 years, or less than 2 years. We have a little thing that you need to clean up there, and I said, yeah, but I don't want to be the HR girl forever. And the guy said, the EVP said, what else can you do? I said, I can do everything, all those. I know all about credit. I was lying through my teeth. I spent 2 weeks in credit. But I said, I'm sure that I can do all those things. And I did clean up their mess. I also found some cost savings and significant cost savings that they could make. And they had 3 operations there, and I ended up being the first female director at Discover. And then after that, I was really pretty happy, but the next thing I did, I ran the recovery department, which is collecting the debt after it's already been written off. When I went there, they were collecting maybe about $80 million, and I engineered a process to sell some of the probate and bankruptcies, and when I left, they were collecting about $220 million. So, whatever the task was, I was never really the expert, but I'd love to get my hands in there and figure what should be done. And maybe sometimes not being the expert worked out pretty well. I was pretty happy at that job. I had my own center, people that in that particular site, nobody bothered you too much as long as you brought the money in. And then we could never have enough call centers. And Salt Lake was the next call center. So on a Friday afternoon, my boss called me, and she's like, how do you like Salt Lake? And I said, oh, it's great. I've been out there for a few meetings and that type of thing. And she says, good, because that's your next assignment. And I thought, okay.
I like it that much.
Yeah. Oh, are you sure about that? She said, yeah, you're the next guy, and you've earned this. You've been well, represented by the collection group, and they said you do a great job. And that's how I got to Salt Lake, 1997. And I thought, what a beautiful place. I'm from Seattle, so it's the closest I've lived to my parents for a long time. And I thought, this is fabulous. And I thought, maybe I could have a place, because you move at in these companies, you would move every 3 to 5 years. You just, okay, sell that house, go to the next one, whatever. And I thought, oh, this is fabulous. And the workforce here is great. None of this that you see here now was here in 1997. When I came back here, I'm like, oh my God, the place is on steroids. I lived in South Jordan, and it was country back then. So I think they had built Thanksgiving Point by the time I was leaving. But the site in West Valley City is what I came to open. And I really was supposed to take 1,000 people from Sandy to West Valley City. That was my job. Customer service, separate it from collections, let collections grow. A month after I got here, again, the Visa MasterCard comes up. They built that building as the headquarters for Visa MasterCard for Discover to start issuing. And we'd had a 7-year fight with Visa MasterCard. We're supposed to be heard by the Supreme Court, and they decided not to hear it. I'd been here 1 month. And the guys who had brought me along, all the old guys, got a package. They retired, and he said, "Okay, Roberts, fill that place up." 400,000 square feet, and I was like, "Oh, okay." And so we immediately did some other things. We added new accounts. We added a telemarketing group and other things to fill up that building because we owned that building. It was the first building outside of headquarters that they actually owned, and I had the best time of my life, the best workforce I'd ever had. We took all the international calls. We were open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. I said, if you just build me a little apartment behind the office, I won't even have to drive back and forth. It was just fabulous. And I could get to Seattle in about 3 years. They said, oh, Nathan's going to Scotland to run the operations over there. And I said, oh, that's great. And Nathan was the president of Discover Bank. And they said, and you're going to Delaware to run Discover Bank. And I was so happy here. I thought, I think that might have been the first time I've ever cried over a promotion. Okay. All right. So, but, the bank is a whole different thing. It's the most critical point for a credit card company. You mess up the bank, guess what? You don't have a company anymore. By that time, we had moved on to the factor that Dean Witter had bought Morgan Stanley, so our parent company was Morgan Stanley, and we were still doing very well, but the focus was strictly on Discover. When I first went, they gave me 5 different business cards, and now my focus is strictly on Discover. And the bank project was really 2 things. For me, I like for my projects to make money. And the bank was necessary for the card where they could make money, but I wanted my cost center to make money. And it was the first time that the bank was able to make money through some of the projects that I brought through. And they wanted that community rating to be a number 1. They had never gotten a community rating of number 1. And so in one fell swoop, what I did was I borrowed $6 million from Morgan Stanley, put it on my boss's cost center, bought an apartment building in inner city Baltimore that they'd run all the druggies out, and they gave low-cost housing to people. And it was one of the first times I was trembling because I was like, how much is that money going to, because $6 million is not a lot to Morgan Stanley, but it was to Discover. And I'm like, how much is that money going to cost me? And they were like, oh yeah, that's right, we own you. And we'll put some kind of cost on your boss's sheet. And I'm like, okay. And so at the same time, I had adopted a child. And I've always said, if I adopt a baby, I need an 18-year leave of absence. And so when I go back in to kind of explain what I've done about buying this apartment house, and it was really lovely. It was already filled up by the time I could get there. And my boss was beaming, and because I'm thinking they're going to fire me any moment. They're going to just say, you spent $6 million and you don't get your money back. It's just, it's a tax credit. And I walk in and David's there and he's beaming. And I'm like, I don't want you to talk about me when I'm retired. He said, can you buy more? He says, there's by that time the auditors and the attorneys and everybody got finished with it. the rate of return, internal rate of return was like an 11 or 12.
Wow.
They were never going to pay income taxes again. And as much as I sweated that, the last time I visited the young man who's running that program now, he says, you know how much we've bought since you left? $435 million worth of that kind of thing that helps communities. You get your credit rating and you get a tax credit. And he says, remember how you were sweating that $6 million? I said, yeah, you know. But those are the kinds of innovations that I did in business, and that made me get to the point of being able to be called the president of something, whether it was the Delaware Bankers Association or visiting with the president or visiting with, you know, the people in Washington, D.C. But I think anyone who's looking at Web3 should be just so delighted to even consider entering this. So,
really fantastic. Yeah, I mean, yes, thank you.
thank you.
So I have some official questions.
Okay.
But before we dive into that, did you ever get to run a store?
I didn't get to run a store, and it was so funny. I interviewed just to like get out of HR and go to the fashion department, even take a demotion. And it was the guy in Renton, Washington. He says, I got a visit coming up. It's a smelly job. You have to be able to haul all this stuff from the back room and do all this. And I didn't get the job. And a friend of mine went to the HR director and said, why didn't Kathy get that job? But it was all in the plan. But I think back then the feel was that there's an A-B scenario. A stores are in big cities. They're bright and shiny. B stores are in Walla Walla, Washington, and those kind of places. And I just think they didn't think that it would be a success for me to go to Walla Walla, Washington, or someplace like that.
Obviously, they chose wisely. They chose wisely. All right, let me pull up my questions really quick. So, going through change is hard for anyone, I think. Maybe especially if you don't look like everybody in the room, right? Tell us how you successfully made this jump at different points in your career from really radically different things. Like, how do you go through that kind of change and do it with aplomb and like a sense of grace and style?
I don't know about grace and style, but if you've got a hammer, I think that is also a good tool.
Grace or a hammer?
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Steel-toed boots. Scott reminded me of. We were ordering cards for something, and I saw the card he made up for me, and I'm like, oh, it has my name on it. Forever, I was told, maybe I was 17 or 18, on your business card, your name is K.M. Roberts. And every business card I've ever had says K.M. Roberts, because you were told, don't let anyone know you're a woman. And don't let a soul know you're a woman. So I'd get this mail for Ken or Kyle or, any male name, or people would be surprised when they met me. So, we tried some arbitrage for a while, but in reality, preparation for me was the biggest piece of making sure that I was going to be competing in a room with only men. If it was a board meeting, I would be the only woman, etc. And I would be up if it meant being up all night, if I didn't get the board book on time, to go through every jot and tittle, or calling another expert. My poor CPA, I think he stayed up with me over, he lived in Texas. I'm like, what does that mean? But every morning at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock, I'd have all the papers delivered to my house, whether it was the Pink Sheets, the Wall Street Journal. I was not going to walk in a room with those guys and not know everything they knew. The only thing I did not know was the sports score, which I'm convinced it comes through the fillings in your teeth if you're a man. Because if I'm with you all day long and you still know the sports score when we go to dinner. So.
Feel that through the depths of my bone. I never know the sports score to anything. Do you think that skill that you developed that would allow you to jump from something like HR to something like finance, how does that impact how you've viewed blockchain? And because this is a lot different from traditional finance.
This is a lot different. And it took me a little bit longer to really understand everything. I'm a mercenary. And when I got the call to say, let's talk about a debit card at the end of this particular chain. This is something that we need for this to be successful. And I'm like, I know what a debit card is, but I didn't know what a blockchain was. Someone was very kind and understanding to explain this whole thing to me. I'm like, And then finally, he sent me a Bitcoin, and it was worth $38,000. I'm like, whatever it is that you want me to figure out, I think I can figure it out. So that was my recruitment tool.
I love it.
And in reality, once I started looking deeper into this, I thought, this is a whole sea change for the world. This is not just a small sliver of the economy. This is going to grow. And then I thought, am I too old? Versus, am I a woman? Am I black? Or, I'm black. I don't know if you noticed that. But it to me, I'm like, I can still do this, and I'm not going to miss this opportunity. And whatever it takes, I will do that. And sometimes, and all, there's a lot of you in this room. Thank you for being here, and thank you for educating me, because several of you have had to go over things with me 2, 3, 4. I'm like, go over it one more time, and I think I can get it.
I love that, because I've talked before about my first blockchain project that I worked on in ICO several years ago, and I was a mercenary with gaining that knowledge. I had an engineer who would sit down with me every single day. I would say, okay, I know you just told me everything yesterday. We got to do it again. And he would sit with his, the whiteboard and describe it in minutia. But I think that the important point isn't just finding a kind, smart person to get that knowledge from. It's the mercenary part, where if you want to know something that you don't know, you got to go after it. You have to be tenacious and unyielding to go gain that knowledge. And I hopefully anybody who is not in blockchain, who's trying to figure out, like, how do I learn this crazy new thing? You learn it by just immersing yourself in it, and there's a world of knowledge. You just have to be tenacious.
It's the same as immersing yourself in any other things.
It is.
I took 3 years of Mandarin in high school because I wanted to go to China. So but reality is that you do have to be tenacious about almost learning anything. And maybe if it doesn't come naturally to you, you might get a little bit, weary about it. But repetition works. And really digging in to the point where you're like, aha, I understand it.
I love it.
And representing whatever you're doing well and really diving into it.
So if there was one thing that you could say, I've taken this from my experience at Switch, and now I'm applying, from Discover, and now I'm applying that at Switch. What's the like golden magic that Kathy brings to Switch?
I think one of the things that all of us took away that went to Discover was that at that point, there hadn't been a new credit card for 23 years. And the cashback bonus was our new tag. And people would say, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard of. The Wall Street Journal said, Sears is selling dollars for 99 cents. How stupid could you be? I would just get angry almost. And we knew how the P&L worked. We knew what our trajectory was, and we had customers. We had all those Sears customers that would, if you had a good Sears card, you're going to get your Discover card. We engaged our customers to help us sign up merchants and that type of thing. So no matter what someone else says you can or cannot do, you don't, almost if you tell me I can't do it, that's the thing I'm going to go do. And I even, for the blockchain, I believe this gotten so much further along at this time I've come in that I don't think there's any stopping it.
I agree. And
so whatever you choose to do, you really need to jump in and do it. And no matter what somebody else says. And when I took the job in Chicago, my mother said, oh, maybe you shouldn't do that. And my dad said, go ahead, go out and take a look at the rest of the world. So,
when you look at all of the credit card companies now, and nobody would imagine not having a cash back, right? Like,
that's right.
Do you get like this little, told you so?
Yeah, we do. And I think at one point, Visa had to come to me when I was the head of the Delaware Bankers Association. The executive called me and said, Visa needs XYZ. I can't remember what it was now, and you've got to approve it. I'm like,
Great in your face.
my conference room. I'm not coming down there. Bring him up here.
I love that. Okay. So tell us about like a major roadblock or a challenge that somebody threw in your way or, just that you've had to overcome.
Well, a major roadblock, I think, in business, there comes those challenges. We've had bad years in collections. We've had regulatory issues that come up. And sometimes I've never been afraid of a regulatory kind of issue or a regulator, but every once in a while it takes a little bit more convincing and talking to your senators and talking to other people and say, do you realize that the value of this particular thing or whatever the project is, if you look at it at this spectrum, you can't tell me that I can have a zero write-off. Do you mean an actual zero write-off? Have you lost your mind? But in any of those roadblocks, whether it's the opportunity to move around the country or whatever, I think one of the things I've always done is take a piece of paper, and I've said this to other people, and I've written down the pros on this side and the cons on this side and say, is there something we can't overcome? How do we get past this? Yeah. And I just think that's in your personal life and in your professional life is how I've looked at that.
Wonderful. And then what advice would you want to give to somebody who really wanted to get involved in Web3?
Well, I think you've already made a step if you're here. Yeah. Many of you are already in the business, but this is something that is going to be pervasive in the world. And there are lots of different ways to participate. When I look at it and I'm like, okay, I am part owner at Switch, but I bought nodes personally. I'm like, and I bought the nodes from the other grants too. I'm like, I'm gonna make sure that I'm involved in this. So whether I'm owning a node, whether I'm working in Web3, and looking at the various ways that you can participate, there's an entry level for everybody at some point, and you don't have to stay at that entry level, or you could. There's lots of educational opportunities, and there's lots of what I would call a really positive cultural opportunity for people who come in. So I think you jumped in.
So I want to talk just a little bit about innovation, because that's, anybody who knows me knows I nerd out about innovation. As you were describing this history, it seems like a lot of your success was being able to get people behind ideas of something nobody had ever tried before. How do you come up with these kinds of great ideas? And then especially as a woman and a Black person in the business who, how do you actually get people on board with radically different ideas?
Money. Money. And really, I think, the first really, I'm not good at telling you ahead of time what I'm going to do. I have some faults, and that's one of them. And when I went to Columbus, Ohio, I was still in HR and I wanted out. And when I read everybody other senior manager's review, because I'm HR, I can read your review. And the manager there had said, and add $100,000 to what your goal was. I need you to take this stretch goal. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm the HR manager. How am I going to add? I'm a cost center. How am I going to get $100,000? And in Washington State, Sears was they were self-insured and for workers' comp. And there was only, at that point, I think there's less, but there were 5 monopolistic states. Ohio was one of them. They were in the state fund, and this is 1989. And they had thousands of employees. There's three operations center. And it cost them $120,000 a year to insure these office workers, because as your payroll grew, your bill grew. Mm-hmm. And I'm still looking for how am I going to get that 100, and it's not my review time. So I wrote the risk manager at Dean Witter and said, I've looked at all of the claims, and we've had $13,000 worth of claims in the last 5 years. Do you think we could have paid that bill ourselves? Or, we could be in, And so the savings from that, I think the first year was $80,000, but as the payroll grew, it would have been more and more. So we just, and then I wrote the letter to the risk manager at Dean Witter, mailed it off to them, and then the next thing I know, the assistant general manager or the director is walking through, and he says, "Did you write this letter to the risk manager at Dean Witter, who Discover reports to?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I did." And he says, "I like the way you think." And I thought, thank God, because I'm like, okay. And then the next thing I know, we are becoming self-insured. So, the other projects, I sold the probate and the bankruptcy when I was in recovery. And they traditionally, you hang on to it and wait until you could collect it, which might be years. But, and I did feel a little bit bad about this because I sold it to, not Lehman Brothers, but another one of those that went under later. But I was working on this project, and we worked on it for years. And the gal's name was Colleen King-Latakanu. And she would come and try to convince me. I'm like, what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with probate? What are you going to do with the bankruptcy? But then I figured out how much more the money was worth to us at maybe 9 cents on the dollar now than it would be 9 cents on the dollar 10 years from now. And so then, the EVP calls me and says, "What are you doing now?" I said, "Well, I'm going to figure out how to sell this paper." He says, "You're going to do what?" I said, "I'm going to sell the paper." And he's like, "Could you tell me sometime what you're going to do?" I said, "Yeah, but I'm going to sell, it's worth more." And then it was a bad collection year. And the CEO of Morgan Stanley flies in along with the treasurer and all the collection guys. I just got this job. And they're arguing in front of me. "Well, if she's going to sell the paper, then what about that?" And they're never talking to me. They're just arguing about it. I'm like, "I don't care what you say. I'm going to sell the paper." So I get promoted to come out here. The guy who gets my job says, "How do I sell that paper?" and that was a short year. And I think we sold $44 million worth of paper that year to close the gap. But innovation, to me, I see these TV shows where people go back and they're like, let's live like we're in the 1600s and build our own cottage. And I don't want to go back to 1961. I want to hit that garage door opener and go right in. I don't want to wash the dishes. I love innovation. I think it's wonderful.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So just 2 more questions. My first is specifically for any of the women in the room. Like you'd like a story where you were told not to put your first name on a business card. Like, I feel like I have some crazy stories, but nothing like that. I remember somebody telling me a woman shouldn't whistle at work because that was not feminine, and I like to whistle a lot. What?
A whistling girl and a crowing hen all come to no good end.
Yes, apparently.
That's what my mother told me. I'm like,
See,
okay, all right, I won't do that anymore.
Do you have any secret tricks that have helped you as a woman in a man's world just to survive a little bit better?
Oh, absolutely. I depended on the personalities of the people that I worked with. I would always try, in some cases, if it was important enough for the company, I would even give the idea away and let you bring the idea forth, even sometimes get the credit if it meant that we were all going to win. So I didn't have to win every time. And sometimes I might go to you, with, if you're the guy that I think you're going to present the idea, can I make a deal? How about you present it and let's see what, because, some of the people that we worked with, and Tom doesn't do this, but I know he's that smart. I'd be halfway through my presentation and I could see the wheels turning like they're already gone, they're off to the races with this. But it was a delicate dance. And then there were some times where I would dig in and say, no. And then there were occasions, and I still try to follow my gut. There were occasions where I'd be in that boardroom and I'd say, no, we shouldn't do that. And somebody would say, why not? And I'm like, I'm not sure. We just shouldn't do that. And after a few times where somebody would say, okay, I think we're going to do that, or, and a couple things had happened with a couple people issues, and a general manager or a VP would say, I'm going to do that anyway. And I'm like, don't do that. Whatever you don't, And then they'd come back and say, well, how did you know? I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
And this mistake is already made. But then you built a reputation around, let's check with Roberts before we do that.
Yeah. You're almost like an oracle.
Yeah. So, still follow your gut.
So last question here. You're now with Switch. Why did you choose Switch? And how does that align with you've had an amazingly successful career. You were retired. Why this? Why now?
Well, that baby is now 21 years old. And so I still, clinching to that. The time off that I took was really the most exciting time of my life to raise a child. He's my first and only child, and through the miracle of adoption, I could be an elderly parent. And with taking that time off, though, there's been such a significant change in innovation, and the trajectory of this project to me is so good that it was hard for me to even resist or think about talking myself out of it. Will I be working here 20 years from now? No, I won't. I will be sitting on the beach, and where's Brad? Brad's going to bring me my check. But I saw that this not only makes a difference for me and the people who would be involved in the project, but this one makes a difference for the whole globe. And I think there are places on the globe that will take advantage of this particular product, the opportunity to take your crypto, move it here, and move it to fiat, where maybe a person or a family, that $50 from whatever activity they're doing might make a big difference in their whole month. It might some places it might make a difference in their whole year. And this is not restrictive. So much of traditional banking and the way that traditional banks work exclude a lot of people. And this is inclusive. So that was the first thing. And I think getting in, working hard, getting the product up and available would only take so much time. And then I am still a mercenary. I'm about the rewards. I want my Switch rewards.
Yeah.
So, I think all of those things combined, I think it was a perfect opportunity.
That's fantastic. So open it up to questions here before we wrap up. We've got one right here.
Hi.
Yeah.
And tell me your name.
My name's Landon.
Okay.
So in the traditional banking system, I know there's some things like CDOs or stuff like that, moving paper. In Web3, do you see ways of collecting debt or different types of systems that might, transfer over or become different?
Yeah. And for everybody's edification, his question is about debt instruments from traditional banking. Do we see that happening in Web3 and in crypto? And, prior to some of the recent tobaccos, we have what we call a roadmap that goes out further than this year. And we do have other instruments in there that we think could be done through crypto. I am going to look at all of those things again, because how you do things is sometimes just as important as what you're doing. So will there be debt instruments? Probably. And will there be ways to collect on them? Probably. But I think anyone in this market now is looking at those things extremely acutely and carefully before they would go into those markets. Yeah. Thank you.
Other questions?
I would like the Switch team to stand up and so that you know who they are. There's Bradley. Where's my check, Brad?
So before we do that, I think we had a question.
Did I miss
here.
one?
Yeah, she did. She was late.
Allie.
So, quick question for you. What was the hardest part for you coming into this new innovative technology to learn?
Will you repeat it back?
Let me say that. She asked what was the hardest part for me coming into this new technology and blockchain. And Allie probably knows because she has to repeat it to me 5 times. but really it was understanding the underpinnings of the blockchain piece of it. And I can remember us sitting in that office in Midway and designing a change in how we were going to do the nodes and how we were going to price those, and the openness of the attention to those kind of details. But it really was the blockchain piece of it, understanding that and how everything moves with the crypto. And that took me a while. So, and Steve had to help me with that, and Maria had to help me with that, and, you know, everybody in here.
Okay, if we have no more questions, one more question.
One more question.
Yeah.
Why on your emails do you only use your initials?
We talked about that.
I'm like, I hope they know who I am. But yeah, and now, you know, I'll sign at the end K, you know, but I don't have time to type in my whole name. It's too long. You know?
She's a busy lady.
And my name is Kathleen Marie Roberts, and in the early days, I think people were hoping that a redhead Irish girl was showing up. And like, I am a little English and Scottish, Miss Ireland, but you know, Kathleen is a long thing to tie in there. But I would like this. Can I have the
your
Switch team?
team's great.
I am so pleased with this team. With the Switch,
Stand up if you're on
Switch people,
Switch.
stand up, please, and show off a little bit, because we have a fantastic group of people. And so if you did have a question about anything that we're doing at Switch, please feel free to tag one of them, and they'll be happy to answer your questions about the project. And if you go on switchrewardcard.com, you can see the video and some other things. And then in this building are some amazing, amazing minds in the nerd sector that have just made all of this possible. So I'll give you a standing ovation. Joseph and Pro Creative, thank you for being here today.
And thank you all for coming. This was a lot of fun. It was great to see so many new faces.